Hi everyone, my name is Veda and today we at Unit 2 and I'll show you how to tattoo color illustration tiger. Let's go! Right guys, so before I start, let me show what's equipment I'm going to use today. So today I'm going to use two machines, Aftercare Aaron's 4-stroke and 4.5. That's going to be for lines, that's going to be for packing colors. For cartridges, I'm going to use Quadron mainly for packing colors and for line work. For ink, I'll use world famous raw pigments and red ink pigment for dark purple because I found is the best color to work with at the moment for considering the purple. So during this session, I will use kitchen roll like every artist use, but also I will use a cotton pad which I just watered and nothing in there, no soap, just water, squeezed maximum, so it's like half wet, half dry. It's very important to keep it in the right wetness, otherwise it might be a bit too wet, so it's remove the stencil too easily. So this is a very important part personally for me. So brand doesn't matter, so as long as pads are cotton wool, good quality, it's fine. I'll use two spray bottles, one just with normal water, nothing else. Another with a soap just to clean the tattoo during the session. I also use a soap in foam just to clean it a little bit easier, but spray with the soap does the same thing to be fair. So in the end of the tattoo, I'll show you how I'm going to use the antiseptic spray from Skinworks. This is must-have in my work because I don't do my work without this spray. Is must-have on my workstation. Right, so preparation is ready. So now let's do the stencil. First of all, we're cleaning the skin with alcohol. Sorry, it's a bit cold. So just cleaning the skin. I usually asking my clients to prepare the skin beforehand, exfoliate and shave, but I can see a little bit of hair left. So what I'm going to do now after cleaning, I will shave a little bit. There's not much hair left, just a few ones. Just to make sure the stencil will stick well, we need to make sure there's no hair left, even little ones. I know sometimes clients say, oh, I don't have any hair, I didn't shave, but the reason for that is to remove the dry skin as well. It's create a smoother texture on the skin, so it's easier to work. So I printed stencil in two different sizes, but I can see we're gonna go with a little bit smaller one because to fit the stencil correctly between existing tattoo, which is on the bottom on the hip. So sometimes I'm using the kitchen roll just to place between, so the kitchen roll and the stencil, place it between because some papers can leave the purple mark before you apply the stencil. So this method a little bit cleaner. So when the skin is completely clean and dry, which is very important, I'm going to place the stencil with a bit of tape just to make sure it's on the right position. As we have this tattoo here and the new tattoo I'm going to go over it, I need to change this part, which is not a problem. I can always freehand. So I think that's the best location for that. So yeah, in this case I need to mark the sides. For stencil, to put the stencil on the skin, usually I use Butterlock stencil glue. So put everywhere, just make sure it cover all the area. Give a little bit of dry, just a tiny bit. On this stage, make sure you don't do any quick move. Everything needs to be slow, just to make sure the stencil plays in the right place. So we can wait for a little bit just to make sure the stencil stick to the skin properly. But with the stencil, Butterlock stencil glue, you don't need to wait too long because it sticks to the skin pretty well. So on this stage, I'll remove my stencil very slow, just to make sure if I miss some bits, I can always come back and press it if it needed. So this part, I did not put a stencil there because I saw it's gonna touch the existing tattoo. So the easiest way to fix that, it's just draw it. So it's gonna go a bit shorter. And I think this part will go a bit shorter as well. Just to keep the composition and dynamic, otherwise they look a bit too symmetrical. With the dripping elements, which I do a lot in my style, you need to make sure it goes directly down. It's not angled, otherwise it might look a little bit off. So, because sometimes it depends how you place the stencil, you change the angle and the dripping elements could go a bit wrong. So you need to make sure it's completely straight. Yeah, I think the size is good. I'm happy about the position. So obviously depends how I'm gonna put the stencil. I need to make sure it works with a body flow. Just because body is not something static, you need to make sure it's correct. It plays correct with anatomy. The stencil's on, the client happy about the size and the position. I'm gonna wait for 15-20 minutes just to make sure the stencil is completely dry, and we rock and roll. Right guys, so we're going into tutorial. I'm planning to start from this corner just because this area is the darkest, and in a color tattoo you need to make sure you do colors in the right order, so from darkest to lightest. But during the session I will show you how I do it in the right way, so the light color is not going to be muddy, even if you're doing dark spots next to it. So we're going to start from here. I'm going to use my FK Irons Max 4-stroke, and I will use a round shader for this area. I will start with 15 round shader, and we'll see which you need to make it thicker or not. So I'm going to set 5.5 volts. And I need to make sure the needle, I can see the needle from the plastic tip quite far, but not too far. Obviously, all this part I'm gonna go inside. So I'll start from this part, use a little bit of tattoo butter. I'm not doing any lines here at the moment, so slowly going in. I prefer to start slower, and I usually never start with some important elements, like eyes or something. Just because it takes a bit of time to adjust your machine, to adjust your hand movements. I'm going with the slow motions, pushing the needle forward. I feel like at the beginning tattoo always go a little bit slower. Yeah, it takes a bit of time for client to relax and for me to find a way how I'm going to work through, because sometimes I have a plan, I will work from one side to another, but actually during session I can change the plan, so it depends really. It's very rare when I do my designs like 100% finished, just because sometimes during the session I can adjust some elements or remove some elements, so it all really depends on the concept. And sometimes I feel like, oh, it doesn't work very well with body flow, or I need to adjust the element, like here for example, because they're touching the existing tattoo. I use round shader for shadings, and also I use round shaders for the lines. With the round shaders you need to go a little bit slower if you do the lines, because I need some time for the needle to actually leave the ink. So if you go too quick with the round shader, sometimes you need to come back to the same area because the line's not as solid as you want. So the same with the slow motions, pushing forward the needle. So yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I do lines with the round shaders and I do the shading. So it depends on the size of the needle which I need to use. So still using dark, deep purple. It does look like black, but actually it's like dark purple, which very easy to work with. This is from Veda Ink, and I found this dark purple the easiest color to work with because it's very watery and it's it goes into the skin quite easy. So I'm gonna do the same with this dripping element. Start slower, pushing the needle forward. It's the same color, deep purple from Veda Ink. I've been using Aftercare irons for a couple of years, and I had this 4-stroke for around 3 years. And I was using 4.5, but I notice it's a bit more dramatic compared with a 4-stroke. So usually when I do shading and packing colors, I always use 4-stroke. Even the heat is not too strong, but it feels like it's less dramatic on the skin. And obviously with the packing colors, you need to make sure the saturation is good enough without overworking the trauma too much. So for these areas, I can take a bigger needle. One of my favorite is 23 curve magnum. So the needle is not too far away from the tip, but far enough so I can see it during the session. And again, with a slow motion, so I'm pushing the needle forward. I think to achieve the best results, you need to make sure your hand movement and your setting on your machine matching completely. So I'm just pushing the needle forward, go very slow, and this is 5.5 volts. I like to use cotton pads during the session, just because it's much softer on the skin and I don't need to wipe too much to leave the skin clean enough. So just continue with the same motion, keeping the needle 45 degrees more or less. Obviously depends on the area, I need to adjust the angle of my needle. But yeah, 45 degrees is the best, so just pushing the needle forward. I don't create any circular motions, just because I found it's overworking the skin a little bit more than I want. Just because to pack the solid color, you need to make sure you saturate the skin enough, but not overworking the skin. So this is the same deep purple from Radiant. So here I need to adjust the angle of the cartridge. So I change the angle a little bit, just to make sure it matches the design. So for these areas, for example, I can use round shaders, or I can use the same 23 curve mag from Quadron and just go it carefully. I found I use 23 quite often, and sometimes it's easier to take a big configuration of needles and just go for quicker compare if you take round shader, for example, like 11 or even 15, it's still quite small. So the easiest way for me is just take 23 mag and pack all the areas, because it's just one color really. Same. I keep my cartridge in 45 degrees, moving the needle forward. I don't change my angle too much. If I need, I can change a little bit and go over it again, but trying to not do too many passes, just because it's a risk to overwork the area. So same, keep the same 45 degree angle, get very close to this element, but I will get a round shader and go over it. Transitioning from fake skin to real skin, the best advice how to do it easier is draw more, practice more, so your hand movement is going to be sturdy and confident enough. So when you're going to do your lines, it's not going to be wonky. Obviously, at the beginning, you learn on your mistakes, but it's the way how you learn in general. So even if you do mistakes, you need to understand how to fix it. And it comes with experience. So on this area, I'm coloring the same with the slow motions. I know everyone is very different. Technique of every artist is very different. So some artists go a bit faster, so some people go a bit slower. Some people doing circular movements. some artists pushing the needle forward, like I do, for example. It's all depends on styles and depends on so many different factors. And it comes with experience. So at the beginning, you just learn different techniques and understand the material, because it's the most important part to understand the anatomy and your material, which is skin. One of the hardest material to work with. So this element is going to be black and very similar to this color. But at the same time, when it's settled and when it's going to be healed, you will see a bit of a difference between different tones. I gravitate to this specific technique because it's the best way to saturate the color without overworking the skin too much, because your movements, it's very, very important. This all depends how you stretch the skin, how you put a needle in the skin, how far is it, what's the depth. So all these factors going to give you different results. And at the beginning, I was just trying different settings, and some of them been working, so some settings did not give me the best results. So it took me years to practice and actually understand the material. And to be fair, I changed my technique around half a year ago, because one of my friends taught me a bit, I would say, better way to saturate, to pack the color. And I find it's a bit more efficient and it heals better because it's not overworking the skin too much. So at the moment I'm using Eclipse Black. I found two brands which I like the most, is Eclipse Black and Pantera Gold. I think when it's healed it looks black. So in this area I go with pengular motions, still pushing the needle forward, but it creates the gradient. To achieve the best result to saturate the black, I would say, is a combination of technique, which is foundation, and also the quality of the ink matters. So I would say, yeah, both. To achieve the best result, you need to understand the technique and have a good equipment. I'm using 15 round shader long medium taper, because I found the long taper, even if it's not so dramatic, it doesn't bring too much ink into the skin. I have to go over it and over it again. So I found medium taper is a bit better. So for all these small elements, I prefer to use round shader. Usually it's 15 round shader or 11. I don't use any small configurations like 5 or 7 round shader, just because I found this sometimes not enough. So I don't use 5 or 7 very often, just because I found it's overworking the skin a little bit easier compared to bigger configurations. It's very important to not overwork the skin, but I have to admit it's not easy, especially at the beginning of your career, if you don't actually know the skin very well, how deep to go, because it depends on the area as well. But yeah, we need to be very careful when we pack the colors, not overworking the skin. So we're working with the right layer of the skin and not go too deep, because sometimes it's easier to leave the saturation and leave the client and ask the client to come back in a couple of months if you need to do any touch-ups. It's better than overwork it completely. And in this case, it will take longer for the skin to recover. I think you need to be careful on any areas, because in the end of the day, we are responsible for what we're gonna leave on the skin, and the client needs to live with it. So, but some areas like necks, obviously faces, ribs, inside of the forearm or where is the ditch, all of these areas when have very fine skin, it needs to be very, very careful because it's so easy to blow on the line and overwork the area. So at the moment I'm using 15 Magnum medium taper, the same, just because this area is a bit narrow. Adjust the needle so it's not too far from the tip. I changed the voltage to 6 just to see if it's gonna pack better, because sometimes I prefer to start with a lower voltage just to see if it's gonna work better or not. If not, if it goes a bit too slow or leaving some gaps, so I prefer to keep the voltage slightly higher. But still 6 volts is quite low. I do like to do lines with the Magnum as well. If I don't need to achieve any sharp lines, just kind of like a soft one, so I take the Magnum instead of swapping to different needle and go over it. It's easier for me. Yes, I'm pushing the needle to saturate the ink properly. I'm pushing forward in the 45-degree. I used to use different technique. I used to pack the color with a circular motions, and I notice it's overworking the skin much easier compared if I'm pushing it. Yeah, so if I'm pushing slowly without doing these circular motions. One other thing which is a little bit annoying about purple, it leaves a lot of marks on the skin, so you need to keep wiping. Otherwise, it just everything looks purple. The stencil purple, the ink purple. So I just noticed a little gap. So what I could do, just go over it. That's it. Not going too deep, just working a little bit on the surface. So these thick lines is the 2 options how I can do. I can do it with Magnum. Same, 45 degrees, pushing the needle forward slowly. Or I can do it with round shader or round liner if I need. But because it's thick enough, I need to go a few passes. Or I can do it with Magnum in one pass, so it depends. So the same here, I can use Magnum or I can use liner. It depends how I want this line to be. If I want sharp line, I'll obviously will use a liner. But you need to remember, liner is more dramatic compared to shader or to Magnum. It's very important to stretch the skin properly so the ink flows easily. Some areas need less stretching, like calf, for example. I do work a lot with calves, but yes, sometimes hip might be very easy to work with as well because the area is flat. There's not much curves. So you can put the big design, like a faces, for example, looks amazing on thighs. So again, the same motions, I'm using the corner of the Magnum, which is 15 Magnum, and we go over it. So it's 2 options how I can color this black element. Could be 23 mag, could be 15. I don't like small configurations like 7 Magnum, for example. It feels like it just leaves lots of holes and not much saturation, at least for me. I find it a little bit not efficient, so I prefer bigger configurations like 23, for example. So yeah, for this area, I will take 23 mag, the same voltage, 6 voltage. 23 Magnum from Quadrum. This is one of my favorite needles. It works so well. I'm using medium taper, just because the way how it saturates. The same black ink. Start from the corner, pushing. Oh no, I think it's a bit too far. So I need to adjust the needle because when I swapping cartridges, sometimes the needle is a bit too far. So I need to adjust it every time, make sure it's not too far. and I'm pushing forward. What I really like about these cotton pads, because I don't need to wipe too much, it's just a little movement, that's it. It's not irritating on the skin is not too red, and the client will thank you by the end of the session, trust me. Some artists say, oh, it's a bit too small, but you can buy a bigger one. I prefer small ones. Brand doesn't really matter, as long as it's not too cheap, because sometimes this little fluff can go everywhere, which is a bit annoying, and it can stuck in your needle as well. So this is one thing to remember. When you use cotton pads, make sure you check your needles if it's any cotton pieces stuck. You need to make sure you clean the cartridges properly. Because we have these dynamic elements, what I could do, I can start from the corner and push the needle to the side, still pushing forward, but creating motions from one side to another. I think it's really important to understand the settings on a machine and your hand movements, because they need to match. And to be fair, it took me many years to understand that. Even now, sometimes I'm learning something new, I'm improving my technique. It takes years of experience and tries. I like FK because it's very good machine quality-wise. It's easy to clean, easy to wrap, because I know some pan machines might be a bit not convenient with the wrapping, and the grip is too big, or the tape doesn't really stick to the grip to cover it completely. So yeah, I like the quality, I like the results. I found 4.5 flux marks sometimes might be a bit traumatic. So I'm still learning how to saturate it properly, because I think it's a very strong machine, and if you don't know how to use it, you can overwork the skin so easy. So I swapped to my 4-stroke for the packing, because I think it's healing better compared to 4.5. But again, it depends on your hand movement, depends how fast you go, depends how deep you go, etc, etc. So it's not like one machine is amazing and the others, they're not great. It's all really depends how you use the equipment, because in the end of the day, it's just a tool, and the way how you use it, that's the most important part. So technique is the base. So on these elements, I will use a liner. So I'm swapping my machine. I start with the dark colors, just because when I use bright colors, I need to make sure the bright colors stay exactly the same, because it's very easier to make it muddy. The muddy means if you, for example, if you do orange or bright yellow here and you do purple here, when the orange done, it looks bright and nice, but when you go higher up and you're wiping your ink, it's a higher chance the ink next to it will stay a bit dirty, and yeah, nothing you can do about that. So obviously after healing it should be okay, but still a little bit of chance it might stay not the same, not the same original bright color. So after I've done shading here, I can always swap to liners or round shader, depends how big the line I need. Probably I'm gonna take liner. So 9 liner, and I'm swapping my machine to 4.5. The voltage on FK Aaron's 4.5 will be around 6.3. We'll see if it's gonna be enough. If not, I can always put a voltage higher. So if I need to make the edges a bit sharper, just go over it a bit carefully without going too deep. So it's 2 ways. You can always do line work first and after pack the color between, or you can pack the color and go over it. So it really depends what sort of effect you want. Again, need to be careful to not go too deep or not overwork the skin. Feels like 6.3 a bit too slow, so I'm increasing the volume to 6.5. And again here I can go slightly over it. I don't go too deep just because we had shading there already. If we go too deep, again, it's going to be over trauma. So just with the line, I'm filling the gaps, checking if I need to go over it anywhere. So for example, around here, it's easy to take a liner into the line. To clean, I use a little bit of foam. It's a bit easier on the skin. As I said, purple sometimes leave a lot of marks around. So by the end of the session, if you have lots of purple, everything might look purple. So you need to make sure you clean your tattoo properly. Because sometimes if you don't clean it properly, you can miss some gaps, or maybe the line is not so crisp, like for example a little bit here. In this case, just because I need to use a thinner needle, I'll use 5 liner 0.25 and put my voltage a little bit down. So this cartridge from Magic Moon, I like the sharpness. To be fair, I don't really mind which cartridge to use for 3 or 5 liners. They're more or less the same. As long as the cartridge is stable, doesn't matter the brand. For example, here I can add some lines. Same with the pushing the needle forward. Sometimes it might look, with a smaller needle, might look like circular motions, but usually it's just moving the needle forward. If I need to fill some small gaps, I can do it with brown shader. In the design, I have some elements on the background, and to make it softer, what I'll take the purple and mix it with a bit of water, just dilute a little bit the pigment. Now I'm using pengular motions to create that soft effect. So I'm not packing it solidly, just as it's on a background, I want to make it softer. Again, mix a bit with a bit of water. Now I'm using edge of the needle, create a thinner line, so I don't need to swap to round shader, for example. This is 11 Magnum medium taper. Again, using the corner of the needle, creating the soft line. Next, I will do line work on this part. Swapping my machine again. I will use 5 liner. With the dabbing motions, I remove excess of ink. Need to be careful in this area because I can easily lose the stencil, a small wipe, so I just need to be a bit more cautious about these areas. There's no right or wrong position if you're pulling the line towards you or other direction. It depends on the area, it depends of the position of the arm, how you feel more comfortable. So the line which you move, the line will be sturdy. If you need to go over it again, it's fine, just not too many times. Just to keep the stencil on a place, sometimes I'm swapping parts to kitchen roll, just because it's dry. I'm pulling the skein with a few directions. Sometimes I pull it in 4 directions, sometimes 3, depends on the area. As naturally my client have very tight skin, I don't need to pull too much, which is easier for me to work with. So I'm coming back to black area. We'll this part black with a round shader. Again, swapping to Magnum. This is 15 Magnum to fill all the gaps. I found it easier to fill the gaps with Magnum just because it's bigger size compared to shader. Also, it feels like it's less trauma. And with a shader, you always need to adjust the angle. Compared to Magnum, it feels a little bit easier. Because even if you keep depends on the angle, obviously it's going to give you different results, but yeah, I'll find with a Magnum it's a bit easier. I'm swapping 15 mag to 23 Magnum. Just a little reminder, I always use soft edge. So from this corner, we're going from dark purple to lighter purple. I take dark purple again. When I'm changing the needle, I'm checking if the needle in correct settings. And from the corner, I'm pushing the needle forward and make it softer in the end to create this soft gradient. And the same from this corner, 45 degrees, just to make the edges softer. I'm taking lighter tone of purple and dipping to same dark purple, just a little bit, to create a smoother transition. If I need to go over it a few times, I'm trying to not go too deep with a third and fourth time, again, to avoid overworking the area. Because purple takes time to saturate, especially if the pigment is very thick. You can see a lot in my work I use lots of purple, but to be fair, even I love purple, I know it's one of the hardest color to work with, and there's a reason for that. Usually it's related to quality of the actual pigment. It doesn't matter what brand you use, the purple is still going to be difficult color to saturate. So it's also some pigments are very thick, and obviously the thicker the pigment is going to be harder to put into the skin. I found dark purples is easier to work with. For example, these colors, it's fairly easy. But if you use something lighter like lilac, for example, or light purple, that's very, very hard to saturate, especially if you don't have experience. Also, I think it depends on the dispersity of the pigment, which, if I'm not mistaken, purple is a medium, but still, compared to black, for example, purple very difficult to saturate without overworking the skin, obviously. I'm washing my needle, make sure there's nothing left. On my station, I use 3 cups of water, one of them for dark, another just for cleaning needles. And the third cup I have from Hive cups, where I put my needles, so the ink is not going to be dry during the session. I took lighter purple, saturating from the corner in the same way, 45 degrees. Just because this area will be a little bit lighter, I go from the corner and do the angular motions just to create this soft edge. For this area, I will take smaller needle. I think 15 mag will be perfectly fit the size, but we'll do it later. So at the moment, let's fill this. Actually, we have a bit more dark purple from here. Again, with the same motions. I can feel the pigment is a bit too thick, so I dip a little bit, just take a little bit of water, but not without diluting the pigment, just to dip in a cup. Yeah, it feels like it needs some smaller needle there. So let's swap to 11 Magnum. So we'll fill these gaps with 11 Magnum. So I would say 23 Magnum is It's very good needle, and you can use it for bigger surfaces, you can use it for smaller, but if you need to fill some like these gaps, I prefer to use 15 or 11. I don't use 7 Magnum or 5, I think they're a bit too small. So yeah, I prefer 11, I think is enough. So from this part, I need to go lighter as well. So from here, from the corner, same motion. So I'm using the lighter purple. If I see some gaps, I go over it. From the corner, 45 degrees. Just to check the saturation, I can spray some water. And it will be easier to see if it's any gaps. Yeah, I can see just a few gaps there. The best way, if you see some gaps, the best way to fix it is go straight away, because as soon as you come back there in, let's say, half an hour, 1 hour, for the client it will be very painful. Also, the skin will rest, so if you start to go over it in some areas, it might again overwork the area and just create extra pain. We need to care after our clients, you know. Yeah, when you see the tattoo, it's not many gaps there, but if you spray the water, you will see there's some yeah, just a few bits. It's just a millimeters, but yeah, you can't see it without water. This is a little trick. So with the ear, we're filling the top part black. So I've done with dark in this area. I will start with a bit of purple just on the edge. 23 mag. Let's go from the line as close as possible and create this soft gradient. So the next color which I'm packing is Orchid, Tom World famous. It's like a dark magenta. Sometimes pigment might be a bit too thick. Again, dip it in a water cup. Same movements, creating the gradient. Many artists say work with magenta not easy as well, again because the pigment quite thick. Some tones easier to work with, for example dark magenta is a bit of a nightmare, but dark purple is actually easier to work with compared to light purple. But at least this is how I found over time what's the difference between some colors. So next color, saturating from the darker magenta to the middle. So next color is reddish, say orange. So basically to do transition from dark, let's say dark purple to yellow, you need to take many other colors, otherwise the transition will be very muddy. So you can't just take yellow, for example, and dark purple and create the palette. It's going to be very difficult. You need to have other colors to create this smooth transition. For the saturation, I'm using angular movements just to saturate it better and create the soft edges. So it depends on the effect which I want to achieve on the skin. I will change my technique a little bit. Make sure when you jump to the new ink, for example from dark purple, dark blue or any other dark colors, make sure you clean your needle properly if you start to use something light like orange, for example. I'm overlapping the same area so I can make it nice gradient. The same motions, just very soft brushing. Just make sure your right hand is always clean, just because sometimes if you have any dirt, or I mean obviously if you have any dark ink on this part of the arm and you're stretching the skin on the area which you already done, especially if you have any light colors, make sure the glove is clean, otherwise you can leave some marks. Usually I put a kitchen roll to cover the area, so if I have any dark ink on my hand, I can always avoid this problem to make muddy pigments. Going to the light orange, saturating in the same technique. Sometimes you can go a little bit over, but don't go too deep. For maximum cleaning between different colors, I use Deep Clean. It's a sponge which helped me to keep the needle clean as possible. Sometimes I do the edge with the Magnum, like this, quickly, just to separate dark and lighter color. After healing all these lines, it's not going to be so obvious, just because we have shading underneath, we have color underneath, but it brings a little bit of detail. One little trick how to keep colors, bright, so I use kitchen roll with a bit of water, place it over it and just cover it during the session, because we have light colors and here I have dark purple and black, so every time when I wipe I need to be very cautious about these areas. So the best way, just to avoid any problems, I cover it with a tissue, and yeah, it helped to skin to settle a little bit as well. So I can spray it with soap or just with water, really. Don't really need anything else. Usually when I do my tattoos, I'm going from the bottom to up. But today, just because this part will be orange and this part will be dark, I need to do this first, just to make sure every time when I wipe, it's not going to affect on this bright orange. So yeah, we're doing the same technique, just saturating from dark purple to light purple. It's the same motions, saturating. With the purple, you need to take time and just make sure you're not rushing, but at the same time do not stay on the same area for too long. For this area, I will use 15 round shader and Flux Max 4.5 stroke. So starting from this point, pulling the line towards me. Usually when I do my lines, I use kitchen roll, just because it's dry compared to pads. It might be a bit extra wetness, and it's not good if you're trying to keep stencil with so many details. The reason why I use cotton pads, it's because it's softer on the skin, because when you use a kitchen roll, sometimes the client feels like you're wiping with a dry tissue, which is not very pleasant, especially when the skin irritated after 5-6 hours. It just feels a bit nicer when you use a cotton pads, which is softer on the skin. I'm using the same lines everywhere, so 15 round shader. The thickest needle which I use for lines is 18 round shader. But for this work, I don't feel like we need it. We might use it here, we'll see, or we stick with the 15 round shader. 18 round shader, quite dramatic, and you need to take time to do the lines with a round shader, especially such a thick needles. When you use different configurations of needle, you need to change your settings on the machine sometimes. As bigger configuration you use, you need to change the settings on a higher voltage, just to make sure it works properly. Angle matters when you use round shaders. It's very difficult to keep the machine 90 degrees to the skin, but ideally to reach similar angle, maybe not 90 degrees, but like, I don't know, like 60. So the cartridge will penetrate the skin evenly through both sides. Otherwise, you might overwork one area, but in another side, you might not have enough ink left. So just quickly go everywhere. Many of my designs based on a line work. Sometimes even I do design with lots of lines. I like to simplify and make edges a bit softer. So that's the reason sometimes the designs look a little bit different compared to the final piece. I can adjust the technique a little bit better. And usually I don't do final piece on an iPad, because on the skin I can put more saturation, more details. These elements easier to do with a round shader again. Or I don't really do packing with liners. I think shader is better for that. But if it's like little element, I can use liner in the same way. I just need to be careful to not overwork the area, because the concentration of trauma from liners are very high. We're just filling all the gaps on these small elements, ideally with one pass. There's no reason to stay on the skin for too long. So again, I'm using Aftercare irons 4.5 stroke. Voltage is 6.5. I know some people might think it's a bit low, and they prefer to work with higher voltages. I notice it match my hand movement a little bit better if I keep my low voltage a bit lower. Also because it's 4.5 is very strong. It has very strong hit. So I don't really need to go very high in the voltages. Some machines with a 3.5 stroke, you can go with a higher settings and it's totally fine as long as it's matching your hand movement. I'm filling these elements with a round shader after I've done outline. There's so many options how you can do the tattoo based on the line work. Some artists doing the lines first of all, and after doing packing the color or do shading. Sometimes people go as a printer from the bottom to up. I would say I kind of in the middle somewhere, because some elements I can feel it like a printer, and sometimes I feel I need to do lines first just to keep a stencil on the skin, just to make sure I'm not going to lose anything, especially if there's so many lines. It's the same with white. I prefer to do white while I'm tattooing. Just make sure I'm not make the white muddy when I'm wiping. So I need to be careful in this case, because I know some artists prefer to do white in the end, but I feel like sometimes it might be a bit too cruel to the client, because as soon as you leave one area and come back to the same area after like 6 hours, it feels really, really painful. So I feel sorry for clients. And in other cases, it's the only way to do white, and leave the white as bright as possible. For these little elements, I will use 3 liner. I can drop the voltage to 6.2. That feels like I need a little bit of power, so let's do 6.5. Because sometimes I can feel the machine goes a bit slow. Because again, 6 volt is not a lot. Yeah, 6.5 is a sweet spot. I'll use the same needle on these elements. I'll just quickly fill it. It's a 3 liner. So for the tongue, instead of using black outlines, I will use the color of the tongue but a little bit darker, which is orchid. It's like a dark magenta. At the beginning it does look like almost like black, but it's going to be a little bit lighter after healing. See the same 3 liner going over it, these lines. Depends on the pressure, the line will be thicker or thinner. So if I need to do like just like a little scratchy line, I don't go too deep. I swapped to 15 Magnum because I want to fill this part, which is black. It will be quicker to do with a Magnum than with a round shader. It's a bit harder to get in these small areas, so I will come back with the same area after I will change to round shader. It's a bit more power, so I'll change the voltage to 6.5. There's 2 methods how you can fill this sort of areas. You go over with Magnum first of all, and after change Magnum to round shader, or round liner actually will be better, for example like 9, and go over the edges. Because I feel it's easier to do the solid saturation when you use liner or shader over the Magnum. On these elements I will do a bit of soft shading on the edges. Same here, just make it a little bit softer. I can always leave the edges a bit softer. It doesn't have to have solid lines around these elements on the mouth. Because I think it's very important, even if you're following the design and you're trying to do it as close as possible, it's always have to have a bit of a room for a bit of freestyle, I would say, a little bit of freedom, because at the end of the day it's art, so you don't have to follow everything 100%. You move the line a little bit or you added something, it's fine as long as it does not affect on the composition too much, or it's not make some elements look too heavy, or so yeah, it all really depends. I think it's good to have a bit of freedom. The best advice for apprentice, I can say, draw on a piece of paper will help you a lot to draw on the skin later on, just because you need to feel confident enough to work with the skin, because obviously it's not the same like you drawing on your iPad, for example. It's way more complicated than that, because in the end of the day, our canvases are humans, so they're moving, they're asking for breaks. So it's always not easy to work with the people compared if you're just drawing on a paper or iPad. These days, no one drawing on paper, I think. But I think it's actually good to practice to draw with a pencil, understand foundation of academic art, for example, contrast, because it's very important in my work, for example, to have the contrast between lightest element and the darkest, so it creates this 3D effect. Without understanding light, midtones and contrast, is going to be really, really difficult to create nice piece. So before to work on people, I would say you need to know how to draw. Even some people will say, oh, you know, you just take the picture and you put it on the skin and you don't have to draw in a creative way, because not everyone needs to be 100% creative and do their own styles, etc., etc. But I think it's very, very crucial. You need to learn how to draw, first of all, on the different materials. Could be acrylic, could be oil. I would say oil is a bit more advanced. Yeah, piece of paper, I don't know, on an iPad, anything. But I would say I'm a little bit old school artist, because I started with pencils and I studied academic art for 8 years. So I had a good foundation. That's why when I do whip shading, for example, which obviously you cannot see on this type of work, whip shading reminds me academic art, because it's the same technique when you're saturating the darkest spot. And it helped me a lot to understand the contrast, the lights, the midtones. But with the colors is a bit more complex. So yeah, I would say the colors is way more challenging. But yeah, I think the best advice is just to draw as small as possible. You don't have to show it to other people, just to draw for yourself. But I think these days, not many artists actually draw for themselves, like when they have free time, because everyone's so busy. So, doing TikTok dances and stuff like that. Improving their social media. Next area, which I will do, is the bottom of the chin. Probably not gonna do any thick lines over there. I'll just will take a round shader and we'll create a soft shading from dark purple to light, because I want to create soft look on this area. So that's the reason why I don't do lines. If I will change my mind, for example, I can always go over it. That's not a problem. Even I lost the stencil, the shading will be there. So saturating slowly this area, pushing the needle forward. So I'll swap round shader to 11 Magnum and creating soft edges. At the moment, I use Deep Amethyst from World Famous, which have a bit more magenta compared to the rest of the purple. And the color look a little bit warmer. It's still very similar to purple palette, but have a different undertone. I'm going same areas. Create the saturation. Yeah, probably I will swap to 11 again, because it feels like I need a bit more accurate with these areas. So the same ink, deep purple from, no, it's called Deep Amethyst from World Famous. I would say I tried so many different pigments, different brands, and I prefer to stick with more or less with the one brand and use it long enough to understand actually how does it heal, if it looks well after a couple of years, couple of months, how is the saturation, and you can see lots of colors on my shelf, but at the same time, this year I will try to simplify my color palette and use the same colors, so at least the result will be predictable. I like World Famous because they're very bright. Most of the colors is easy to saturate and easy to work with. I would say some of the magenta a little bit difficult to work with, especially dark magentas, but bright pink, it's very easy to work with. If we're talking about purple, as I mentioned earlier, it's difficult color anyway. It doesn't matter the brand, they're just not easy to pack anyway. When I meet new people, I always ask them what brands do you use, what needles do they use, what ink they use in their work, especially if it's something super bright. I notice everyone achieving brightness in completely different ways. It does relate to the technique. Even the ink quality matters a lot. But I can see so many artists can achieve the same bright result with a completely different tools. And every time if somebody say, oh, do you want to try this ink? How about this? How about that? And I'm trying to not try too many inks, just because otherwise I get a bit confused. I don't know which one I used, which one heals well. So I'm trying to stick with the same needles, with the same equipment, just to know the result. Because if you use different materials all the time, how are you gonna know if something goes wrong? What might be the issue? You can see I'm wiping ink from different directions, so sometimes it's down, sometimes it's on the side. Just because it depends of the area, it's easier for me to wipe on the side, so I don't create the mud here. In this moment, I'm jumping from one place to another, but I use the same color. Instead of cleaning the needle and go to lighter tone, I use the same color just in the different places. They're not too far from each other, so it doesn't really matter. For example, here, if I can see the transition is not smooth enough, I can take the darker tone and go over it. Sometimes you need to change the voltage to go a little bit lower, just because we have ink there already. Still feels like it's not enough softness, so I'll mix this color with a darker one and go slightly over it. If I see some areas not dark enough, I can always go over it just slightly without pushing too hard. So if the client bleeds a lot, I'm just crying inside because I'm like, oh, it's so difficult to work. But the thing is, it does happen. It doesn't mean the person drank alcohol and he's bleeding. Sometimes it's just very natural for them. Some people bleed more, some people bleed less, so it really depends. In this case, I can sometimes go a bit slower, but usually it is what it is, so you can't do much. I heard coffee might affect on blood pressure, but even then, people don't really bleed much from coffee, and obviously, you cannot stop people drinking coffee before coming to the studio. It's very difficult. So I would say bleeding related to blood pressure, or if he ate something which makes the blood thinner, it might affect. Obviously some medication like paracetamol or ibuprofen might affect on bleeding. Definitely aspirin. Or just happen in natural. Some people bleed more. Not many things you can do. You can use some spray to help the skin to calm down, but during the session it's a bit tricky because it dilutes the pigment as well. But usually if they bleed a lot during the session, after 2-3 hours, the skin completely cool down and they have no blood. I do have a few sprays which help to cool down the skin, but yeah, it doesn't really help much with bleeding, unfortunately. I do like have lots of different colors in my designs, but at the same time I base the design on a complementary theory. So basically, for people who don't know much about colors, it's colors which located on the opposites on the color wheel, and it's create the maximum contrast, and it does look very interesting in tattoos just because it's create extra contrast. Also, tattoos needs to based on difference between mid-tones and light tones and dark tones, just to create this 3D effect or depth. So before to be a color artist, I would say, yeah, little advice to people who just starting their careers. It's better to understand the light, the mid-tones, the shadows, because without this knowledge, it doesn't matter which colors you're going to use, it's still going to be flat. So the contrast is essential in tattoos, just because in the end of the day working with the skin, not with a piece of paper, so the skin cannot take the contrast in the same way. So all the inks needs to be have the contrast between. So I would say complementary colors. This is one of the easiest way to create designs. So for example, I take dark purple, and complementary color for the dark purple is bright yellow. But because I don't like yellow, I prefer to combine it with a bit of orange. In this case, the combination looks a little bit more interesting, in my opinion. It's just, yeah, personally, I'm not a big fan of yellow. I like this one, so when it's easily blended with orange, but yellow itself, it doesn't really, I don't know, it doesn't speak to me. I think I like challenges, and that's why I decided to start to work with a purple, just because it came very naturally for me. Also, I like this color, even I never wear it in my clothes. It's just beautiful, amazing color. But yeah, even it's very difficult to saturate, I still like it. The pink, I don't know, just brings a bit of feminine energy. Compared to purple is a bit more, I don't know, it's very spiritual color for me. It's very, very magical. And I guess it suits for my ideas, just because I'm doing lots of different animals in a cartoony style and have a bit more, yeah, mystery effect. So yeah, I think this palette suits very well with my style in general. So if someone interested to do similar style, I would say it's very important to use bright pigments, keep a contrast between colors. Don't put too many colors because you might get confused and it might look a little bit maybe messy, because we don't do realism in this case. So the colors needs to be, let's say, pure. But at the same time is the way how I combine pastel colors and bright colors. So in this case, my tattoos doesn't look childish just because of the color palette. And if you use only super bright, pure colors, it doesn't mean your tattoo will look bright. It might look a bit too much, as I said, like childish. So it needs to have a balance between dark tones, light tones, color, different hue, and yeah, have a harmony in general. The best tattoo advice is draw more. It's the only way. I know many beginner artists trying to avoid this stage and jump straight to the skin, or apprentices. They were like, oh, why I need to learn about hygienic standards, or why I need to learn about drawing on a piece of paper. But it is very essential because it's a foundation, because jumping to work on the skin is too early. I would say hygienic stuff is extremely important as well, because in the end of the day, it's a safety for you, for your clients, and for your colleagues as well. Cross-contamination, understand the hygiene in general. So yeah, it's very, very important. I know we didn't say mild, but we didn't say anything about hygienic, how do I rub things, but yeah, you can find a lot of information over the internet. It's a base really, but yeah, I would say the best advice which people gave me, the best advice which artists gave to me when I didn't have enough experience, it's practice more, draw more. It's the way how you progress. And I think sometimes you need to have a little bit of courage to try new things or try new style which nobody's done before you. And it might be a bit scary, and I guess you just need to take opportunity and experiment. I think is important, just to find a person who can give you his skin and just practice, or practice on a fake skin. A fake skin and real skin never is going to be the same. But yeah, practice, draw more. It's a base. So I finished this area I saturate all the details around, and now I'm going to do highlights. So I'm taking white and go over it here. Even if I go a little bit over the black, it's still okay, as long as I don't push too much. Just kind of layer it. I go a little bit deeper, just to saturate a bit solidly and go softer on the edges. I can use a round shader for this area, or Magnum. This is 15 Magnum soft edge from Quadron. The same on these areas, just go over it with a bit of white. Yeah, white is definitely white is definitely a very difficult color to work with, just because it's thick enough and you can't go too deep in the skin, otherwise over time it became very creamy. So you need to work with a right layer of the skin, so without overworking and not pressing too much, but hard enough so you don't need to come back to the same area like 10 times. So for example, here I'm doing white lines, and it's easy to do with a round shader, so I'll swap to the shader now. When I saturate white, I always try not to go too deep, just because over time the white will be very, very creamy yellowish color if you go too deep. If you don't go deep enough, it's not going to be visible. So it's the way how you find this balance between deep enough but not too deep. And I don't really mention any millimeters how far I'm working, because it doesn't really make sense. You need to feel the skin, you need to understand if the skin have some fat underneath, or have more muscles, or have just skin and bones. It all really depends on different factors, so yeah, never really pay attention to millimeters. To give more details on this area, I'm adding white lines above the black dots, just to create a little bit of 3D effect. It's a very simple method, without adding too much different colors, just add highlights. One little line in the middle and separate one side of the nose from another. Even the difference between colors was not very obvious, but just the one line in the middle, and it brings a contrast, which I think is a very good trick. Because we have a layer of ink here already with white, when I go over it, I do not press too much. Now I'm moving to the last section, because I will do black, and this area have lots of bright ink. I'll cover that with a kitchen roll with a bit of water, and start with the lines, and we'll fill with a bright orange. But at the moment, let's do lines. I use Aftercare irons 4.5 for lines, voltage 6.9, almost 7. Because for big configuration, I feel like we need a little bit more power. I'm using 15 liner from Quadron. I like Quadron because needles are very sturdy, it doesn't have much of a movement side to side when you're pulling the line. So it feels like it's a very stable needle. To saturate bright orange, I'm opening new cartridges, just because I used it for darker color and it does not look as clean as before, so I'm just opening a new one. At least in this case, I know the orange is gonna be like orange. Okay, seems like orange done. Just to check how good is saturation, I can spray with water just to see through if it's any gaps. Yeah, I can see just a few gaps, so we can fill it quickly. To fill the gaps, I go over the same area, but very light, without pressure. Because skin broken already, is no point to put too much pressure. I have to admit, orange color is very easy to work with. And it works very well with dark purple, just to bring the contrast, so I think it's a great combination. And the last, I will add light gray over here, and we're done. To do quick lines, I'm swapping my machine again to Flux Mugs. So tattoo done, and I'll have a final wash with the soap in a foam form, which gently will clean the skin. So now the tattoo done, and we're moving to Aftercare. Right, let's get into Aftercare. Before to rub my client, I will use the antiseptic just to spray the area. It does not stink, it doesn't have any alcohol, but it helps the skin to calm down and make sure the whole surface clean. Butter dry, doesn't have much blood, so it's good, should be dry tomorrow. I am not a big fan of second skin for the big tattoos, something like this size. If I would do something small, I'll probably use Dermalyze, just stick it and forget about it for a couple of days. But because we have a decent size of the tattoo, the best way to heal it and keep it covered for the next couple of days is with the pads. That's the best way. Just cover it with the pad, keep it for a couple of hours or till tomorrow morning, change it, wash it, make sure tattoo is completely clean and dry. No need to moisturize for the next couple of days. Just make sure your tattoo is clean and dry before to start to put any creams. Usually I recommend the first couple of days to not apply any moisturizers because the tattoo is still very wet, so we don't really need to put any extra moisture there. For the pads I use Whitfield's, also use Tattoo Armor, but at the moment I have a Whitfield's. They have smaller size, but they works as good as others. Okay, so change it in a couple of hours, or because it's very late now, around 8. You can leave it till tomorrow, up to you. Just make sure when you remove the pad, don't rip it off, okay? Yeah. You remember. You remember everything. Cool. And that's the tutorial. Yay! Right guys, thanks for watching and hopefully you learned something new today. And if you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. But for now, I'm gonna go home and watch a film.